But I'm going to explain why I think that this is actually really kind of more Xbox news than anything. And we'll see if you guys line up with kind of what I'm suggesting and understand kind of where I'm coming from with this stuff. Because, again, I do feel like we sort of live in a weird time for gaming, and a lot of people maybe expect one thing or another to kind of have market shares. In contrast, Microsoft and Xbox have a smaller reach, making it unprofitable to release major
When I began in this business back in the PlayStation 1 era, you could make a really big game for $4, $5, $6 million, $7 million. And sometimes you could sell 15 or 20 million units of a game that cost that much to make. And you sold each game for $59.99 plus tax. Fast forward to the year 2024, to make that same blockbuster game that sells 10 to 15 million or 20 million units, in AAA it's going to cost you $100, $150 million before marketing. At the store, you can only charge $59.99 plus tax. So you can easily see how the growth in the development costs are met with zero elasticity in the price of the game.
So, in a recent interview with Eurogamer, former PlayStation executive Shawn Layden shared his perspective on the evolving landscape of console gaming. Reflecting on the technological advancements from the original PlayStation to the PlayStation 5, Layden noted that the era of significant performance leaps between console generations has diminished. He remarked, "You're not going to see another PS1 to PS2 jump in performance. We have sort of maxed out there." Layden elaborated on the plateauing innovation curve in hardware, emphasizing that modern consoles from different manufacturers now share similar chipsets, primarily built by AMD, with distinctions mainly in operating systems and proprietary features. He suggested that consoles are approaching their final specifications, with future competition likely centered more on content than hardware capabilities. Looking ahead, Layden speculated that the relevance of dedicated gaming consoles might wane in the coming generations as technological advancements and market dynamics shift the focus toward content accessibility across various platforms. The first time Sony really did a mid-range upgrade was PlayStation 4 Pro, because up until then, new versions of its consoles usually were where we brought the cost down. We used fewer parts, you got a better, more compact footprint. It was smaller and cheaper. PS4 Pro was the first time we said, okay, instead of continuing to reduce the size and the cost of the standard model, we have some tech here. We have some abilities to take the current PlayStation 4 game library and juice it up. I think it worked really well on PS4. I think there was also some market pricing that made it an easier transition from your standard PS4 to get a Pro 3 years later. But again, now we're all chasing that diminishing returns point where I'm unsure if people can really tell the difference. If you're playing your game with your curtains open and the sunlight is hitting against your OLED, you're not seeing any ray tracing in real-world scenarios. It's really hard to get the full impact of some of these innovations without having the perfect viewing experience. We're going into the mid-gen now with PS5 Pro at a robust price point, so to speak, and it remains to be seen who the market is for that. I think it's a connoisseur market, shall we say. He was also asked about Sony Kadakawa merger, and he had some interesting things to say, and I quote, "The two companies have always been close. The From Software Association goes back to the early days of PlayStation. They were one of the launch partners, coming out with games back then. And then, if you look at the board of directors, historically there's been a number of Sony people who've served on boards at Kadakawa, that type of thing. They're not strangers, that's for sure. I don't know what the timeline is on Elden Ring 2. I'm sure it's a bit down the pike. It's honestly a relief that Shawn Layden is no longer at Sony. Reading his latest comments and watching him speak feels like listening to that one tired gamer in a Reddit thread who keeps saying gaming is dead because they can't see past their own nostalgia. Instead of embracing the potential of the industry or recognizing where things are headed, Layden sounds more like someone stuck in the past, overly cynical about the future of gaming. Let's be real, his remarks about the console space nearing irrelevance are borderline laughable. Consoles are more relevant than ever, not just because of affordability, but because they are the backbone of gaming culture for the majority of players. His failure to acknowledge this, while instead painting a doom and gloom picture, feels completely out of touch. It's like he's trying to take a jab at the company he used to work for, as if there wasn't enough room for his perspective back in the day. And honestly, maybe there wasn't, for good reason. What really grinds my gears is his complete dismissal of the bigger picture, optimization, and lazy development. Layden talks like the hardware is to blame, but the reality is that many developers are cutting corners. It's not the console's fault that games are riddled with bugs bugs, lack polish, or perform poorly. It's the studios failing to take full advantage of the hardware they're working with. Look at what Insomniac, Naughty Dog, or Santa Monica Studio have done with the PS4 and PS5. They've delivered masterpieces because they know how to optimize their work. Layden seems to overlook that entirely. It's ironic because during his tenure at PlayStation, he oversaw some of the most amazing console exclusives. You'd think he'd be the first to acknowledge the importance of pushing hardware to its limits and holding developers to higher standards. Instead, he's sitting back and criticizing the industry as if he's a jaded outsider. If anything, his comments just highlight why a fresh perspective at Sony was needed. Many observers feel that the leap in game graphics from one generation to the next is no longer as dramatic as it once was. In the early console and PC eras, each new hardware cycle brought obvious improvements, more polygons, sharper textures, and clearly better effects. Today, while games still improve visually, the changes tend to be more subtle and incremental. But does this mean that graphics have truly peaked, or is the reality more nuanced? Game visuals have improved to the point that large, revolutionary leaps are less common. We've gone from pixelated sprites to photorealistic characters and environments that can sometimes be mistaken for real life. Instead of seeing huge jumps, we're at a stage where refinements are often about detail, lighting, and subtle effect. Technologies like physically based rendering, advanced shaders, real-time ray tracing, and complex material systems push realism forward, but these improvements are more incremental. The jump from great to even better is naturally less dramatic than going from primitive to decent. Upscaling, frame generation, and visual trade-offs. Techniques like DLSS, FSR, and frame generation aim to maintain high frame rates and smooth gameplay even as resolutions and detail levels climb. These systems produce impressive results much of the time, but they rely on reconstructing images or inserting frames synthetically. As a result, some players notice artifacts such as occasional blurriness, ghosting, or slight input lag, especially in fast-paced games. But the industry as a whole seems to have jumped on the ray tracing bandwagon without fully considering its implications. Ray tracing and path tracing are undoubtedly groundbreaking technologies, but they demand immense hardware resources, which limits their practical application for most players. Shawn Layden's comment about not seeing the benefits of ray tracing if you're playing with the curtains open is humorous, but highlights a fundamental truth. The visual impact of these technologies often goes unnoticed in regular gameplay scenarios. Take Insomniac's work on Spider-Man 2. It's a fantastic example of ray tracing done right. They managed to integrate ray tracing seamlessly into the game without compromising performance. The reflections, lighting, and overall polish enhance the experience without dragging the frame rates into the dirt. However, this is more the exception than the rule. Many games, especially those relying on engines like Unreal Engine 5, struggle to implement ray tracing without significant sacrifices in performance or stability. For every Spider-Man 2, there are countless titles where ray tracing adds little to the gameplay experience while introducing frame drops, stuttering, or the need for aggressive upscaling to maintain playability. The push for ray tracing feels like an industry-wide arms race to showcase the next big thing in graphics, but it often comes at the cost of gameplay innovation. Developers are spending so much time and resources on implementing these visually stunning effects that other aspects, like AI, world building, and interactivity, take a back seat. This fixation on lighting and reflections overshadows the more holistic improvements that gamers truly appreciate. Furthermore, the hardware required to fully utilize ray tracing is still out of reach for many players. Even current-gen consoles like the PS5 and Xbox Series X struggle to run ray-traced games smoothly without compromises. On PC, only those with the latest GPUs can enjoy ray tracing at its full potential, leaving a significant portion of gamers out of the loop. This exclusivity creates a divide, making it clear that the industry may not have been ready to embrace this technology as a standard. Perhaps the focus should have been on refining other areas of gaming first. AI advancements, physics systems, and game design could have taken precedence over visual fidelity. Graphics, after all, are only one part of what makes a game great. As Layden implied, the wow factor of ray tracing is only relevant if players actually notice and appreciate it, and most of the time, they don't. Horizon Forbidden West. Its vibrant, lush environments, detailed character models, and dynamic lighting create a world that feels alive, even without real-time reflections or ray trace lighting. Guerrilla Games achieved this with the Decima engine, relying on excellent pre-baked lighting and meticulous attention to detail. God of War. Even on the PS4, the game's cinematic presentation, complex textures, and creative use of shadows and lighting bring its Norse mythology-inspired world to life. The developers focused on creating a cohesive, immersive atmosphere rather than relying on flashy new tech. The Last of Us, Part 2. Naughty Dog pushed the PS4 hardware to its absolute limit with unmatched facial animations, incredible environmental detail, and dynamic lighting that feels natural without ray tracing. The result was a game that felt next-gen on a last-gen console. If you want to be ahead of all the gaming leaks and news, specifically PlayStation news, time for you to subscribe. And as always, a like on the video is very much appreciated.